in Baltimore and WNST NFL draft, and it looks like the Ravens have picked themselves up another wide receiver to sort of add into all of the drama of who they would draft on offense, who they would draft to rush the quarterback. I'm sort of spanning the globe, and this guy covered the entire sport of the NFL for SI for a long time. Now does it for the Detroit Lions and the Athletic in Detroit with a little bit of focus on the Lions, but I know he is still watching all things draft heading into Thursday night and into the weekend. We welcome one of our defending champions back from the Motor City. We welcome Chris Burke back on. What's going on, man? Certainly not baseball in either one of our towns, right? So, if it's not football right now, you don't have much happening. Not hockey in your town either at this point. But, it's up on us, and the quarterback thing still drives this engine, right? Like, all I read about is Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield. The other three guys are going to go in the top 5, 6, whatever it's going to be. But I'm starting to hear deals and weird stuff. It's a fun time to be an internet person.
Yeah, for sure. That was a rough trip for the Orioles into Detroit a few days ago. I think it is. I don't know. It's just such a long process. I think everyone's just so ready for it to be here by now. But it is a fun draft because we don't know what's happening at one. We don't know where the quarterbacks are going. You're right. The quarterbacks really dictate everything, and I think because of them, you're going to see. We already saw the one trade up by the Jets. I think we'll probably see 4 or 5 more on that first night of the draft, and certainly, I mean, the Lions are a team that would love to trade down. The Ravens might be a team that would like to trade down too. So, it's almost impossible to figure out where everything's going to happen this year because we still got to wait and see what happens with those quarterbacks.
I still look at this weekend, and I saw some conjecture on the net about some people inside the industry not loving this. Dude, if you don't love this, get out. You know, I mean, if you and honestly, like, this is the resetting of everything, right? Like, this is the weekend we figure out who's playing where and who's not playing and who's retiring and, and who needs to add to their team. I mean, there's so much conversation from network to network, from website to website, from pundit to pundit, city to city, people reaching to me about the Ravens or Luke and what we do here, people reaching to you in Detroit and saying, what are the Lions up to on the backside of this? That it really does kind of feed the engine, and it's something that I really do enjoy. Now, I don't, watching the whole Dallas thing unfold and all the pomp and circumstance and mascots pulling names and, all the military and the families and the this and the that and how great the NFL. I mean, I can live without that, but the picks themselves and the football side of all of this, I'm into that. And I know you're sitting on 20. The Ravens are sitting on 16 at this point. And the quarterbacks are kind of firing some of the engine because if Lamar Jackson were to get past Arizona at 15 and the Ravens are on the clock, Ozzie loves when his phone rings, right? and I would think the Lions are also somewhat, a team at 20 that if their phone rings there, this is the period in the draft where you'd like to get 2 or 3 guys in the 40s and 50s and 60s instead of just 1 or 2, right?
Yeah, and especially this year because I think unless you're searching a quarterback, once you get into that 20 range, certainly there's not a whole lot of gap between the guys are going to go in the 20s and the guys that are going to go in the 70s at the top of round 3. I mean, I think it's that deep of a class, but that even of a class too. I think there's a lot of guys, not a ton of guys necessarily maybe that are superstars, but a lot of guys in that sort of day 2 range. So I think certainly teams that are middle, late round 1 that don't have an immediate, desperate, pressing need will be looking to get back and move back a little bit, pick up a couple extra picks, and just sort of stockpile those really solid players this year. So, and Lamar Jackson, I mean, I think maybe Josh Rosen's really the other one of the big names that you could see sliding, but I don't know that he would get into that range. I mean, I think once you get down to 11, 12, he probably goes. So, yeah, it is Lamar Jackson, and if teams want Lamar Jackson, certainly for Baltimore, you're trying to convince everyone else that the Chargers are going to take him at 17. You got to come up to 16. So make your move, send us your best shot, and we'll see if we can hammer something out. And that's if the Ravens aren't taking a quarterback themselves, that's a great spot to be in should it happen. You want to be the team that doesn't want to take a quarterback but has a quarterback sitting there in your lap because you can get on the horn and see what you can come up with.
I think the winner of this draft, other than the Browns, because they win the draft every year, will be whatever team winds up with 3, 4, 5 players between picks 25 and 75, right? Like whoever gets that haul in the second and third round that comes back with 4 or 5 names that look like guys that are going to wind up on the field in the next 18 months, then, that to me, that's where the winners are. And that's been one of the spots that the Ravens have lost in the second round. The Ravens have lost the first round several times. They've done exceedingly well, third through sixth round as far as getting guys on the field, and certainly have done very well with offensive linemen, getting guys like Osemele and Ricky Wagner, and now this year Ryan Jensen paid. But then you have to go back to the draft, and we're talking about offensive line around here again with McGlinchey and all of that. And I know that that's not really far removed from what the Lions might be looking at 20, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then the Ravens don't neither the Lions don't either, but they have those comp picks. I think they have one. The Ravens have one in the 6th or maybe, but yeah, that was always a spot that seemed like they found a little nook where they were always picking up a comp pick here and there and don't have that. So maybe you have to make a move to pick up an extra one because you don't have that second round 3 or round 4 pick. And that's sort of the challenge for the Ravens. What's the value on these guys if they stay put? Do they? It looks like we've been talking about wide receiver to the Ravens for 2 months, and now all of a sudden it doesn't look like they necessarily need a wide receiver in the first round. So how does that change the picture? If it's McGlinchey, is that the value at 16, or is he a better value at 25 after you trade back 9 spots? And so those are the decisions you got to try and figure out here in the next 48, 57 hours, whatever however long it is till you actually go on the clock. And it's tough. Again, it's tough because you don't know what's going to happen 1 through 15 in this draft especially. So you're trying to figure out, is McGlinchey going to be there? And if he's not, what's the backup plan? And I don't know. I definitely could. I've sort of got them circled. There are teams throughout round 1 that you kind of circle and say, all right, they're pretty likely. If teams trade down, that's one of the likely ones. And I certainly would have the Ravens circled as one of those teams right now.
He is Chris Burke. You can follow his journey out at The Athletic in Detroit, as well as at Chris Burke NFL. He did it for a long time at SI on a national basis, especially breaking down these drafts year after year. All of our WNST draft coverage brought to you by Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. The tasty coffee, the fill up now. You use your mobile app when you're filling up on your gas. You'll get your fried chicken for free. But I'm going to tell you right now, Thursday night, there will be fried chicken and Western fries in my belly during the draft to get my fingers all messy during the draft, because that's what I'm going to be doing on Thursday night. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Also brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. We all felt those March winds blow through and the April rains. Make sure your corporate, your commercial roof space is dry. Get someone up there to at least take a look at it and say it's good. Cole Roofing are those people. They've been doing it for 99 years, 3 generations now. Pfister Energy also now attached and showing you how to make some dough up on your roof as well. Chris Burke can be followed at The Athletic, as well as Chris Burke NFL. Chris, you said something about the wide receivers, and it is fascinating. I was running around the combine, it feels like 2 minutes ago, out in Indianapolis with Luke, and Ozzy's doing his little song and dance and saying, we're going to change the room, we're going to change the room. And they changed the room, and that is a wholesale heart transplant for the wide receiver position here, that 3 at some point decorated guys. I mean, certainly Crabtree's been decorated from the beginning, playing at Super Bowls, first-round draft pick, all that. John Brown, who got it done in Arizona. Obviously Snead, who got it done with Breeze. Both of those guys had sort of wizard quarterbacks and wizard offensive systems that we haven't really felt around here in Baltimore in some time. But Flacco's got bodies to throw it to. Perryman's still kind of hanging around as a first-round draft pick that never was. We believe never will be, but time will tell on that. And then they have this pick that, when we were at the Combine, all eyes were on Ridley. There were on DJ Moore. Obviously, other guys moving their way. Cortland Sutton up the ranks here since then. But it feels like not at all wide receiver. But it doesn't say that they wouldn't go after Hayden Hurst, or they wouldn't take a look at a Gesicki or somebody like that, or try to back up a little bit and grab one of those guys.
Yeah, I think I certainly could see them moving back and going that direction. But I also don't know. I mean, I don't know that you totally rule out wide receiver. I think what general managers really try to do in the February, March time frame is get them, and I guess into April, to some extent, is get themselves to a point where they're not feeling desperate anywhere. And the Ravens headed into the offseason looked like they were going to be desperate at wide receiver, where you had to take one on day one, and if not on day one, certainly on day two. And now, they're not necessarily in that position anymore because you have those guys, but you also sort of look ahead. I mean, how many more years is Crabtree going to be effective? John Brown, I think, is on a 1-year deal. It's not like these guys are going to be here for 4, 5, 6 years necessarily. So I think there's still room for them to go get another wide receiver, especially if they're, pulling the ripcord on Perriman at this point. But you do kind of.
Well, I think they already pulled the ripcord when he was a healthy scratch in November, December.
Right.
And, games trying to get to the playoffs. So I mean, that felt like a ripcord to me. But I don't know. We haven't heard a word about it in 3 months, right?
But you're right. I mean, I think that again, you talk about value, and I think you could make a case for a wide receiver at 16. I think you can make a great case for a wide receiver or one of those top tight ends if you get into if you're in the low 20s and you've added a couple picks. I think that's a great spot to go try to find sort of a game-changing player at one of those spots. So, yeah, at 16, it's tough. You kind of worry, again, you maybe want to trade down. Maybe you really have one guy you're hoping falls to you, but there's also kind of the danger that you get trapped kind of in no man's land where you don't need a quarterback and you're a little high for the guys that you're thinking are interesting, and then you've got to go find a team to come up. So again, that's really a spot where I think that they are. I don't want to say it's highly probable that they trade back, but I think there's a really good opportunity for them to trade back because I think the guys that they may be looking at make more sense in the 20s probably. So, I don't think it's a terrible spot to be in. And again, I think that if nothing else, they put themselves in a position at wide receiver where they have options now and they have some guys that they know can go out there and make some catches.
Chris Burke is our guest. He is Chris Burke NFL out on Twitter as well as out in Motown, covering the Detroit Lions for The Athletic. And tell everybody what The Athletic's all about because it's a unique proposition in our sports media landscape, Chris.
Yeah, well, we keep expanding feels like every day here, and getting into new cities and new areas. And it's, it's a subscription site behind the paywall, but, it's essentially, what you might have paid for when you were growing up and you bought one of those great sports magazines. And like you said, I came from Sports Illustrated. I think reading The Athletic, you get a lot of the type of content you would get from Sports Illustrated and certainly would have gotten from Sports Illustrated when those magazines were a little thicker than they are now. It's more in-depth, take a little more time to kind of craft everything. And no ads, no videos, it's all straightforward, just what you want to read. And I think we've been able to kind of, we're kind of in a nice space where we can really listen to what our readership wants and what people feel like they're missing and kind of deliver that for them. So, $3-4 a month, and hopefully we're returning that investment for people.
He is Chris Burke. He is at The Athletic. You can go follow him. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Jockey Club in Laurel. The entries are now in the morning newspaper, brought to you by Planet Fitness, as well as on the front of our website. Chris, for the Ravens, the final thing I would say about them is you being on the outside, being a national writer for a long time, now being embedded with the Lions, on a one-on-one basis and trying to figure out what they're doing. Ozzie is underappreciated here to some degree in modern terms because they haven't been good for out of the last 5 years. They haven't made the playoffs. There have been some mistakes. There's certainly been some bad drafts. Talk about Perriman and Elam and guys that, they've drafted the second round that never got on the field, the Arthur Browns. And not to mention the Sergio Kindles, which some of that, bad fortune, good fortune or whatever. But they've won championships, and this is sort of the last go-round for Ozzie. Sort of famously, this is the last draft for him. No one else has ever picked a football player in the history of the franchise here. And time will tell if all of our, media brothers and sisters will, invite him back into Canton as an architect. And I think they will. But, it's interesting that he's never been able to pick a wide receiver, A. And B, I think from the outside, he's much more appreciated as being someone deft in all of this, because you mentioned the trade up, the trade back, knowing what your options are. You never have to worry about that with the Ravens. The Ravens come prepared on draft night. The Ravens don't screw up on draft night. The Ravens are as good at doing this as any organization's ever been, because they've done it together the same way for 25 years, right?
Yeah, and it is sort of an interesting spot to be in, knowing that this is going to be the last year with your current GM in place. And as you said, it's the same people in the building. They're just sort of promoting from within. You would assume it would still keep running the way that it's always run, but it makes it a little more interesting because, you look at Ozzie Newsome and sort of how he wants to leave this legacy, and is he drafting you guys to sort of plan out 3 or 4 years from down the line, or is he drafting to try and go win it, in his last go-round as GM this year? Is he looking for those really immediate, instant impact guys that can maybe push you over the top? And I think that the answer to that will kind of determine where they go with those, especially those early picks. And again, maybe quarterback is on the table for them. Maybe they are thinking, well, we need to start planning for 2021 and look at quarterback now. So it's a unique spot for them to be in going in. But you're right. I mean, people know not every draft pick has hit, but that they're going to sort of explore all options, and they're going to be smart about what they're doing. They're not going to get into a space where they're really reaching, and it sort of goes back to the wide receiver discussion. You're making sure that you're just feeling good about most spots on the roster so that you can go have that freedom to sort of explore the space on draft weekend.
Doesn't Bill Belichick sort of own this draft with the 23 and the 31? Because sort of with those picks, he could do whatever he would want to do, right? Like literally, right?
Yeah, I mean, the AFC East, because you got the Jets at 3 probably thinking quarterback, and then Miami maybe at 11 would move up and get a quarterback, and you have Buffalo with 2 first-rounders, needs a quarterback. So that division is going to drive a lot of what happens on Thursday night. But it's unusual to see the Patriots, with that sort of, draft pick leverage and that sort of ammunition to maybe make their move themselves if they want to go up. But also, B, I think they have some pretty clear needs at this point, and that includes potentially, again, planning ahead at quarterback. As good as Tom Brady remains, you've got to figure he's near the end of his career here. So how aggressive do they want to be finding a guy that maybe steps in for him later? They've got some holes at offensive tackle. I mean, there's some spots where they need to improve. So we'll see. And it's unlike the Ravens, where you kind of look back at their history and say, all right, well, they've liked adding some extra picks. They're a team that will go down, and they're comfortable moving down. We're not really. I mean, Belichick's a wild card. You never really know where he's going to go. He could trade into the top 10. He could trade out of both those round 1 picks and just stockpile.
But you usually don't have the artillery to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, right. And
he's another guy that is he drafting for 2021 anymore? How deep in is he? How quick is that change coming? I mean, that's going to be a real story all weekend long, this whole Tom Brady, Kraft Belichick saga that began back in November and was, reported to be fake news, much like all their hero in down on Pennsylvania Avenue as well. And it's all been true. They've had problems there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's. I think again, you're clearly closer to the end of that, dynasty than you are to the beginning, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. Obviously, Brady's advancing in his age as a quarterback here, but I do think that they are butting heads more often. And now we're hearing, there's the Gronkowski trade rumors and everything, and at some point, even for that franchise, you start stripping away all those key pieces and. At some point, it has to catch up to you. So, like you said, that I think that you kind of expect them to go in and say, well, what do we need to get over the top this year? But you also don't often have that type of ammunition. Those 2 picks in the first round, they're usually picking in the high 20s and the 30s. Now they've got 23. They've got the potential to move up and get a higher spot than that if they really want to. 3 picks in the top 50. And they're not often in those positions to really go aggressively after something at the top of the board. So whether that's quarterback or whether that's offensive tackle or just a guy starts slipping a little bit, they really fall in love with him and want to go grab him, we could see them wheeling and dealing too. And it's another team that's really hard to pin down because they could go so many different directions.
He will be locking himself in a room along with all the rest of us this weekend. He is Chris Burke, NFL, on Twitter, as well as at The Athletic, where he covers the Detroit Lions. So, you've always been into the draft, and you've appeared for years with us here talking about the draft on the whole. Now you're sort of inside the bunker of this Lions thing and trying to figure out what they're doing. They're fascinating with the Stafford thing. By the way, I love the Stafford Ryan twins photos. Those are wonderful. If you haven't seen those, Google those. But they have a quarterback there that's very well compensated, that's very well thought of. He's coulda, shoulda, woulda, mighta, but hasn't. And Flacco has, and nobody believes in Flacco. But nobody's saying the Lions need to be looking for another quarterback at 20, right?
No, I don't think. I mean, they might grab one later because they don't really have a young guy that they're developing behind Stafford, but I think they're 100% confident in him. I think he's proven that he's a really good quarterback in this league, and they're planning on him being their guy for the next 5-10 years if it works out that way. And the problem for them is the same problem that's been the Lions' issue for years and years and decades. They just haven't been able to get over the top and haven't been able to get that playoff win. They eventually got to start having some success, but I don't think they're hanging that on Stafford. And I think they still view him as a guy that's going to push them through, as opposed to someone they need to start looking at options to replace.
Hey man, any thoughts? What's your mock saying to you about Lions at this point?
I think they go front seven on defense, and depending on which guy's there, maybe Deron Payne, maybe Taven Bryan. I think they go someone who helps them up front. Just between the coaching change and where their needs are, I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, Matt Patricia, his voice doesn't match his look. That's the first thing I noticed when I approached the podium in Indianapolis. I'm like, wow, he doesn't sound the way I thought he was going to sound.
Yeah, he's a fun guy. I mean, he's a fun guy. He's a lot more personality than they had in the building before.
Well, but also coming from New England, you sort of expect him to be a little bit more dour, right? I mean, it was almost like sort of welcoming and friendly. I never saw him as a welcoming and friendly figure with a hoodie on the sidelines in the cold.
No, he really is. He does. I think he cuts a different image on the field, and like you said, I think some of that's just the Belichick era Patriots.
I've always seen him as an assassin, Chris, to be honest with you.
Right, yeah. I mean, he definitely is not that guy. He sat down, the day he got introduced as coach here, he sat down with one-on-one with all the writers, and I got in the room with him and, just introduced myself. We talked for a minute. He said, all right, well, tell me what you love about the game of football. What'd you do with football growing up? And really just ask me. I mean, he's really an outgoing. You can understand why people like being around him and like having him in the building. And certainly the Lions fans are going to love him, but love him as long as he's winning. If they go 7-9 the next 2 years, that honeymoon will end pretty quickly.
Well, I remember when I rooted for the Lions when Schwartz was there, and now that Schwartz has an Eagles ring, things work out, don't they? Sometimes they do. Hey, man, enjoy the draft. It really is a fun weekend, I think, for all of us who love football, and we do love football. And this should be sort of the culmination of all that because we don't have to worry about them playing games or at least throwing it around for another 3 months here. We get a little bit of downtime, but it's always fun to see what's under the hood. Always great to catch up with you, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Chris Burke, NFL, the way to find him out on Twitter. Tens of thousands follow his journey out at The Athletic in Detroit as well. You can also follow him at The Athletic DET on Twitter as well. You can find me out on the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. It's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com. Reminder, Modell Lyric on on Thursday night, if you're not staying home and watching the draft, you want to hear some great music, the music of Pink Floyd, as experienced by Brit Floyd, the touring troupe. They tour the world. We had Damian Darlington on the other day. They're playing Thursday night at the Model Lyric. And then, of course, Jackson Browns next Thursday night, next Wednesday night, next Thursday night, Wednesday night. Let me get that right. It's the 3rd. I know that. I just need to get the date right because I don't want to give the wrong date on the radio. That would really stink if we did that. We show up for the wrong night. It's the 3rd. It's Thursday night. So I was right. Jackson Brown at the Model Lyric next Thursday night. William Shatner coming next month. And then, of course, the music of Kansas and Steely Dan. I'm really looking forward to Steely Dan. That is the week of my 50th birthday in October. And we're taking off for Nashville that weekend, putting the whole thing together under the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. If you need some information on our road trips to Charlotte and Nashville, toss me a note, nasty@WNST.net. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube, WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.